بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وصلواته وسلامه على النبي الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Um, Last night I had made a few posts that I wanted to comment a little bit further on. Um, as to the post that I commented on from Wajahad Ali, Uh, this is not the first time that he has made this kind of comment. In fact, just a week or two ago, I think he had made some kind of a post talking about um, the kid in Kenosha who shot some people, and had talked about, wow, what if Muslims had fundraised for this? And now, him talking about, what if it were a Muslim? This kind of thinking I find very annoying. Kind of gets the vein to stand out on the side of my forehead. Um, And I've seen a tendency amongst, just to be blunt, uh, certain Muslims, certain groups of Muslims uh, that constantly put the dominant culture in a position by which they try to make some kind of public observation or judgment, but they're unable to do so purely on, say, I don't know, an ethical or moral grounds. And they always frame it as, well, what if Muslims? This really seems like begging in a certain kind of way. This kind of feels like a kind of, I don't know, intellectual public cringing or begging. Like as I had said in the case with the shooting in Kenosha and a group of Christians that were fundraising for his legal defense. If this was something that you didn't like, then why don't you just condemn it on those terms instead of having to say, well, what if a Muslim had done it? One, it really undermines the value and the efficacy of what you're saying, because then it's not the act that it's the issue. The act is that only, I don't know, white people or Christians or conservatives or whatever it is, right? Some group other than the Muslims are able to do this, and this is where the consternation, right, is really ensconced, that it's not rooted in it being wrong, right? It's just rooted in, oh, Muslims can't do that. And then two, actually, on further examination, are you telling me that Muslims can't fundraise? My whole 30 years as a Muslim, all I've done is seen one fundraiser after another for every cause that you can possibly imagine. So to me, this is just idiotic. What, Muslims can't fundraise? Of course they can fundraise. Maybe we just don't have the courage to fund. I don't know, for whatever cause. Is there some cause that we feel scared to fundraise for? I don't know. And then, bringing it to, well, you can just imagine what conservatives would do if Amy Coney Barrett was a Muslim. Yeah, yeah, of course. There would. Number one, I mean, I have to actually kind of disagree with Wajahad on this. Actually, I have to totally disagree, right? But if a Muslim could actually get to being on the Supreme Court, there'd have to be some like massive change in society. I don't know. Maybe Sharia would have crept until the point of, I don't know, we won. I don't know. I mean, this is just an absolutely ridiculous statement. Um, so if you can actually, if you really want to apply your imagination, well, wow, if we actually made it that far, well, I don't know, maybe all of society is Muslim now and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Or on the flip, we've seen many, many different Muslim politicians, right? That if they're just simply senators or Congress people that are saying like, well, in my Quran, Allah is a she, or I'm going to go dance in a LGBTQ pride parade, right? If that's what you're getting, let alone the Supreme Court judge, then I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I don't know how controversial it might be. More, it actually might be more controversial amongst the Muslims than it would be amongst so-called conservatives, and especially what he means here, what white conservatives. So the attitude is really ridiculous. Now, if you had don't don't be upset simply because conservatives have a certain kind of logic that they play to, even admittedly at times that logic is skewed, flawed, biased, and has double standards to it. Well, that's to be expected to some degree. So one, that's just called politics. Um, but then in relation to that, Mehdi Hassan, who barely does politics well, should really just stay in the realm of politics instead of making innuendos and trying to throw Salafis under the bus, right? In his comment about um, Barrett's stance on originalism is kind of like the Salafis. Number one, this is an absolutely ignorant comment, wanting to interpret the text that places emphasis on the original author, or in this case, authors, right, of the Constitution, but drawing a parallel, right? The Salafis don't just care about the Salaf, okay? They also care about the original author of the Quran, which of course is Allah, right? And guess what? It isn't just the Salafis that care about that, right? Um, even when it comes to let's say the hadith literature, right, where now you get into you know human beings, right, multiple authors, right. Again, it isn't the Salafis that are only concerned with originalism, right? And I think some people here are misinterpreting the word originalism, or let's pull that back. Mahdi is confusing the term originalism with literalism, right? Now, there's a difference. Of course, we've had a movement. It's not had much traction amongst the Muslims, the Zahiriya, right? The literalists. It's a very small, intellectual movement. It would be really kind of hard put to call it an actual school of thought. But there certainly has been a movement, but it's very small, right? But this is actually conflating Salafism for literalism. And again, the concern about, having the text be as pristine as possible and interpreting it according to those who understood it in that time period as much as possible. Like, that's not a concern just for Salafis. This is a stupid, which really then it comes down to, well, here's a news story talking about American politics, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to take shots at some particular Muslim group that I don't like, and that's why I really can't stand, when people like Mehdi Hassan that have no religious training, that have no religious knowledge whatsoever, and reveal their ignorance, right, by saying, oh, this sounds very Salafi-esque. That's the dumbest thing that I've heard from somebody commenting on religion in the last 24 hours. Again, anybody that has really studied Deen will know that if you want to draw some sort of analogy or parallel between, originalism, well, trust me, the vast majority of Muslim groups place an unbelievable amount of primacy on the authenticity of the Quran and even the authenticity of the Sunnah, right? I mean, all of the four major schools, right, as well as the particularly, I guess you could say, beyond the four schools, right, in that other subcategory of knowledge we call usul al-fiqh, right, the usuliyun, right, the people who are about foundational knowledge, absolutely are super scrupulous about, well, what was meant, right, by this. Like, the when it comes to the field of lugha, of language, right, of understanding either the language of the Quran or the statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Like, one doesn't study Lughat al-Arabiya, one doesn't study the Arabic language in this context without wanting to know, well, what was that meant by the Arabs at the time? That's why one goes and studies, for instance, Jahili Shi'r, right? One goes and studies poetry from the pre-Islamic time. Why? Not to be smart, but to figure out, what did the Arabs mean when they said this or when they said that, right? So when Mehdi Hassan is doing this, he's not really taking shots at originalism. No, he's really taking shots at the Salafis. And so he has some, I don't know, personal axe to grind with the Salafis, which, okay, maybe you do, but how does that have to then get drug into, particularly given your position as a so-called journalist, and I mean, so much for objectivity and this whole idea of journalism being some sort of objective endeavor. It just shows that, I don't know, he has some juvenile axe to grind with the Salafis, which, okay, fine. I mean, I'm not saying that you cannot have an axe to grind with the Salafis, but why are you pulling that into a conversation so that you can once again have a public moment of one Muslim tearing out another Muslim's throat, all for the delight of the public spectacle? I mean, this really reminds me of, Gladiator, right? Where it's like you're just sitting here and fighting each other for the pleasure of the emperor. So when people were saying, well, he didn't, either him, because I made a third meme about the Matrix one with Lawrence Fishburne saying, what if I told you? But it's true, right? I mean, a lot of this, the part of this that cannot be, that needs to be drug out into the light, that people have to understand. A lot of these things are coming, especially perhaps more the one from Wajahat than from Mahdi, is this aspect of like Eurocentrism. I really want to move away from the word white supremacy because I feel that word has been so overly dragged through the mud that it almost doesn't mean anything anymore. But I do believe that the word Eurocentrism, definitely, of which perhaps white supremacy is kind of like a grandchild of, and so just this constant, if you have an axe to grind, okay, grind the axe. If you have a critique to make, just make the critique. You have a problem with originalism as a legal theory, okay, fine. Matter of fact, one easy critique that one could make against originalism would be simply to say that, hey, the founding fathers were not Allah. They were not God. They were not infallible. They were not anbiya, right? They were not prophets and messengers that were guaranteed isma or infallibility. And therefore, if there is to be any originalism, it has to be a kind of soft originalism, or perhaps it really can't be an originalism, right? We really can't have an originalism because, it's just too humanly fallible. There's nothing divine about the United States Constitution, of which I might even throw a few chips on the table in that argument because I do believe the way that the United States Constitution is discussed, particularly with some conservatives, is that it almost seems to be like some kind of divine truth claim. And this I find shocking sometimes because it comes from a lot of Christian conservatives that they speak on behalf or they speak about the United States Constitution as if it were another tablet that Moses alayhi salam brought down from Mount Sinai. So if you wanted to make a legitimate critique against originalism, they most certainly are out there. And you can do it without having to, bash Salafis. Now, again, if you have your disagreement with Salafis, then make the time and place and have the courage to do so. One, you need to study. It has to be more than just like, I don't like Salafis because sometimes they're abrupt. Grow a spine, man. And again, the other one in terms of, imagine if it were enough of this, like, crying and going to mama. It's like, mama, Chucky did this and Chucky did that. And I can't, stop your whining, man. As Schwarzenegger said, stop your whining. It really is unbecoming, especially if somebody that wants to seem to keep positioning themselves as some kind of public, pseudo-public Muslim intellectual writing op-eds for the New York Times, which should tell you enough right there about how much stock we can place in that. Just simply, if you think that there's discrimination, or just call it out with having to say, well, imagine if a Muslim. This is pathetic, man. It just seems like you're always pining for some approval and you're sour about it because, it's like, you didn't have enough courage to ask a girl out to the dance, which, technically we don't really do, but just using something from my own jahiliyyah, right? You didn't have enough courage, man, to ask the parents, right? This isn't our case, right? You didn't have enough courage to ask the Muslim parents for, the girl's hand in marriage, but you're gonna just, I don't know, mope about it, or I don't know. This to me is very cowardly, and it serves no good purpose for them. If you're trying to teach the Muslims some important lesson, you're definitely way off of the mark. And again, for people that seem to get upset, this is not the first time that he has done this kind of thing. And, I personally, hey, if we're going to be making public comments, well, then I think it's fair to be able to publicly criticize his public criticisms. And I think that it just continues to lead our community in the wrong direction, that we need to, not that we shouldn't have opinions on things, or more importantly, perhaps we should have stances on things, because that takes, right, a lot more, that takes a lot more than just simply having opinions, that we should be taking stances on things. But then those need to be done principled and intelligently. And I'll be the first to tell you that, that isn't always easy to do. But that is the direction we should be going in. And not just simply complaining because one group has a privilege that we don't have. To be quite honest, if Revelation, if you read Revelation clearly, there were all kinds of double standards and injustices that the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims had to deal with in his time. And that should tell us that, maybe going forward, that is some of what we can expect, is that we will always kind of be a somewhat odd man out. Again, I had to kind of clarify to some people the other day that had this feeling that, well, you make all these criticisms against liberalism, so you must be a conservative. And I'm like, I don't think you've really been paying attention. I make plenty of criticisms against conservatism. And I feel that as long as we feel that like we got to pick a side, we're either going to be liberal or we're either going to be conservative. No, and this is what it means to be Muslim. It means to never really commit oneself wholly, right? Maybe situationally, but not wholly to anything other than Allah and His Messenger, right? And I know that this will have the effect of feeling like, man, we don't really have a home. We don't really have a home base. Well, we would if we all cooperated together, right? Yes, exactly, as one person just wrote. It's all rooted, a lot of this is rooted in an inferiority complex, tremendously so, right? And that we don't need to replace this with a equally false superiority complex. We should be humble, and we can be situationally in alignment with certain things one to another, but not completely, you know. So, when it comes to the treatment of children, we see people migrating. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to go all the way full bore and embrace some kind of open border type thing, right? At the same time, if we are dealing, especially, I think this is the part that I never really saw Muslims bring up enough, that when it came to, for instance, when all those people were coming to the border from like Mexico or Guatemala and whatnot, it's like, hey, look, obviously, we played a definitive role in the destabilizing of a lot of these countries, right? And there's a reason why, these people, were coming here. And that at the end of the day, we're talking about children. So we can take a stand about that, but then we don't have to go to the point where, now, because we care about children, now we're sudden we're marching in some alphabet soup parade, or we're getting involved in trans rights. It's like all of a sudden now it sort of snowballs into all these other things of like, no, we obviously believe in human dignity. We believe in the sanctity of life. We believe in particularly caring for the orphan, all those things, without having to necessarily just, go to extremes. And likewise, we can maybe want to support or stand for legislation that will ensure religious freedom or other things. But again, we don't have to go to the point where, we're conflating the United States Constitution with some kind of, divine truth claim. I was saying that the other day about all of this talk of, patriotism. Well, number one, all of these conservatives who love to wave about their flag. Number one, I'm sorry, but I find all that kind of idolatrous, especially the love that people give the flag is like almost more love than they give their mother, and it definitely seems to be more love than they give God. And this is simply, to me, feels like a kind of idolatry. And therefore, I'm very, and then two, right, all this talk of patriotism. Well, there's nothing in the United States Constitution that says I have to be patriotic. It doesn't even say I have to like America, right? And this is something, again, that I find the flag waving, everything patriotic, MAGA hat wearing, conservatives. It's like you claim to be, originalists, you claim to be constitutionalists, and yet this document that you hold so dear, right, and this truth that you seem to hold to be so self-evident, doesn't actually demand these things of me. So again, I am very leery of extreme alignment with the left or the right because it's just a pit of vipers, and it's very, very dangerous. And that there really should be, if we're going to align and commit, it should just be aligning and committing on Allah, His book, and His messenger. Very simple. And that leaves the most, that gives us so much to support one another on. And that leaves plenty of wiggle room to be able to live a dignified life in a society where people are very, where there's, many, many different people, right? I think that is the real key to living in a pluralistic society is وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, right? All hold on to the rope of Allah, right? And don't split up. So anyway, just some little further thoughts and clarity on some of the posts that I had made and why I had made them, and hopefully just as some encouragement to just be confident in yourself, and most important, have some confidence in your Lord that He will provide, that we can live a good life that will be satisfying, most importantly to Him and even to us, and that we don't always have to look to gauging our value and our worth by what others are doing. So yeah, exactly. We are the 1%, right? We're 1% of the country. So, again, I think it should just all be situational. Like, what does Islam say about this? What ought to we do, right? And then coming together. And then, if there are some people that, there will be differences of opinion amongst us, and I don't see the need for us to necessarily tear out our throats. But what I'm talking about is where we're getting our big sense of direction from, right? And that I'm very, very concerned about, that increasingly that the Quran is a book that while we want Islam to be respected, right? Particularly want it to be respected by Chuck. We want to be respected by the dominant culture, right? Somebody asked, who is Chuck? Does that mean Chuck Schumer? No. When I use the word Chuck, it's just a euphemism for, the dominant society. We get incensed when, people don't like Islam or they don't like the Quran, whatever, but then at the same time, we're fighting for rights of which then we don't even want to put into practice. Are we really, we have to ask ourselves, am I really attached to this book? Am I really attached to this way of life? Am I really attached to this messenger? If I am, can I just simply be told, or can I be convinced or persuaded to forsake or forego that attachment simply because somebody doesn't like what I do, or I don't know, this is very weak-minded, some kind of Jedi mind trick. Anyway, I got to get ready for the school day here. Got to get my daughter up and get back on that horse again and ride for another 8 hours. So inshallah, hope you guys have a great day. May Allah keep and bless you, keep you safe, inshallah, and keep you thabitun. Inshallah, keep you firm upon His deen. Wa salawatuhu wa salamuhu ala nabiyhi al-kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.